Hey, welcome back to Joyboy Solar. So this is the first video on hopefully a long series of videos to better inform you on solar power. Now, before we go into the specifics of the solar industry and the utility industry and things of that nature, um, and I promise this is going to get into the detail about solar, but there are a couple human-based problems that are involved that I think are worth or merit a discussion beforehand. Um, and so the first problem I'm going to talk about is a very human problem, okay? It might not seem very relevant or related, but I promise you it is, okay? Now, let's take a look at this example I have over here. Now, humor me. This is a pot of hot water. Okay, as you can see, we have the flame over here, increasing the temperature. The water is boiling, getting hot, 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 hot. And let's say for this example, we have a small frog right here. This little critter right here is a frog. I know it's poorly drawn, but bear with me. Now, if you grab this tiny little frog and you were to toss it into boiling hot water, two things would happen. Either one, the frog would die from the heat immediately, or if it can withstand the heat for, at least a second and use half of its brain, it will more than likely choose to jump out of the hot water, right? And I don't think too many people would argue with this, okay? Now, let's take that exact same scenario. You have a pot of water, you have a fire underneath, and you have your little frog friend over here that you're unfortunately going to toss in there. Now, if you were to toss this frog into the water before you boil, okay, the frog is going to sit in there. It's going to be hanging out. No big deal. It's room temperature water. It's a frog. It'll be fine. However, if you go ahead and you start increasing the temperature about 1 degree every minute, eventually the water will begin to boil and the frog will eventually, and pardon the pun, will eventually croak. So why doesn't the frog jump out when the water gets hot? Well, the answer is pretty simple. And this is very true about people as well. And that is that gradual change over time is very hard for us to detect. Number one. Number two, even when you do detect a gradual change, if the change isn't big enough to warrant you taking new action, then you won't, because it's easier to do something that you're comfortable doing than it is to try something new. Which is why many companies, especially here in America, that rely on their monopolies have the ability to essentially force all the frogs into this water, and then from there you don't really have much of a choice. And that is typically what happens here, unfortunately, to most people. Most people are aware that their utility company or their cable company or their insurance company, most companies really aren't out there to have your back. They're there to make money. Most people understand that. However, it's easier to accept that than it is to try something new that might be riskier or that you might perceive as riskier. And I want you to keep this in the back of your head as we talk about these companies, because it's going to become more and more apparent why this is important, okay? So now let's talk about actual electricity, okay? So let's talk about utility companies, all right? Now, I live in the state of Florida, so I'm going to be talking specifically about how our state does solar and utility and electricity and things of that nature. It's not going to be the same in every state. However, it is going to be similar, and I will try to talk about some of those variations. Um, but just keep in mind that this is going to be primarily geared towards a Florida market. However, again, it really does apply to most other markets as well. Just a few key details here and there. So here in the state of Florida, we have a utility company. We have multiple, but realistically speaking, there's only one, and that is Florida Power and Light, FPL. Okay. Now, There are a few other utility companies, but those are very county specific and basically non-existent. You have to live in like 2 or 3 counties in this in this state to actually have a different utility company. So most people use FPL. With that being said, that means that FPL has a monopoly. You can't really go to another utility company because they don't exist. So what this means is that in FPL, there's no choice. You either have FPL or you don't have power. It's typically lifelong. You will be paying them for the rest of your life. My grandma still pays FPL bills. She's been paying them since she lived here in Florida, so lifelong. Obviously, it's bad for the planet depending on where FPL chooses to source its electricity. Unfortunately for us, they're going to choose to source it wherever it's the cheapest, and usually that means wherever it's the dirtiest. FPL increases prices anywhere from 4 to 20% every year, and that's non-negotiable. You have no say-so. Now, there is a Florida commission that is technically there to regulate price increases, but all FPL needs is a valid excuse, and they also lobby those exact same people. So as long as they have a credible excuse, they can increase your rate. And believe you me, they always have a credible excuse to raise your rate. Obviously, the variable bill, your bill is going to depend on your rate, which can go up or down, usually up, or your usage, which again can go up or down depending on obviously the time of the year and how much you're using at the time. So your bills can vary pretty drastically. Obviously, there's also no equity. All right, so you pay for the electricity, you use the electricity, and that's the extent of it. If you decide to move from where you're living, you can move, but FPL is not gonna, pay you back for the electricity that you've already used and paid them for. You're not getting any of that back. That's kind of like paying rent. When you pay rent, it's gone, right? So it's exactly the same. And essentially what a utility company serves as is a middleman between the production and the delivery. They're the ones that deliver. Now, in some states, like in Florida, FPL does produce a lot of its energy, but the reason that it produces a lot of its energy is because they had a deal back when infrastructure was, being built in this country. They basically had a deal where they said, FPL said, okay, we're going to invest in the infrastructure in this state. However, that means that you cannot have competition that is not using our infrastructure. So if anything, FPL has an even stronger monopoly, not only on the delivery side of things, but also on the production side of things. So FPL has full control on what they charge and things of that nature, which makes it almost a little bit more outrageous to me, honestly, that they increase your prices. But anyway, so you either choose this or you don't have electricity, and that's in the state of Florida. Now, in other states, that's not always the case. There is competition, which is always good. That's what America is supposed to be: free market, capitalist, competitions, choices, things of that nature. However, I'm going to explain to you why, even if there was competition between utility companies, there's still not as effective as you being your own production plant at the end of the day, right? So let's take a look at it this way. Let's say there was another option here in Florida. Let's say there was a FPL 2.0. All right, and I wrote that here in this, as you can see over here, FPL 2.0. Now let's say they open up FPL 2.0 yesterday. Now you do have a choice, right? You can choose FPL or FPL 2.0. It's up to you which one you choose. 9 out of 10 times, probably still going to be lifelong. It is a company. It is a business. They still need to generate that money. There is more than likely still no equity. You're still basically renting the electricity, renting what you use or whatever. Price increases. I mean, maybe your price won't increase as much because now there's competition, but chances are, you will still see some form of increase in price. Whether that's, there's less oil, so it costs more to make, or, they need a new infrastructure, invest in infrastructure to get the electricity to you. There's a lot of reasons why the price can increase. Maybe they do offer a price protection though. Maybe, FPL will increase 4 to 20%. Maybe FPL 2.0 will say, you know what, the most we will ever increase your rate is 7%, which is still a lot, but hey, that's better than 20%, right? And at the end of the day, FPL 2.0 is still the middleman between you and your electricity. Okay. So when it comes to utility companies, at the end of the day, there's three people in the equation, typically. That's the production, the power plant, the distributor, the utility company, and you, the person that uses it. No matter what you do, no matter what kind of combination you run between the production and the middleman, if you cut both out, the producer and the middleman, you're always going to be left with a cheaper product. And we'll go into more detail about that. But let's talk about solar compared to a utility company. Now, when you go solar, the biggest thing for me is freedom, right? Now, depending on the state that you live, it might be possible to go off the grid completely. Might not be. It really does depend. But whether you decide to go completely off the grid or still be on the grid but using solar, it's going to be a much, much greater sense of freedom and reliability. For the same reason that having your own garden is more reliable than a grocery store, and it's always going to be lower cost and healthier for you and things of that nature. So that's one big thing, right? For solar is the freedom there. Also, there's many different solar companies, which is a good and a bad thing. There's freedom of choice, but there's always the risk of making the wrong choice, which is what causes a lot of people to not go to solar. Now, no choices might seem like a bad thing, but for a person, for humans, typically less choices is better because it's easier for you to make a decision and you're not jumping between decisions as often, worried about making the wrong one because there's only one to make, right? So it's a good and a bad thing definitely for solar, but if you find the right company, it's always going to be better than any utility company, even the best utility company. Typically, the time frame that you're looking at in terms of monthly payments is 25 years or less. So 25 years, yes, sounds like a long time, but you're going to pay your utility company for the rest of your life anyway. So, I mean, at that point, which one is longer? The rest of your life or 25 years? And for different people, that's a different answer, of course. Um, Obviously, solar is better for the planet, which is always a plus. 20 to 50% less cost. Let me repeat that. 20 to 50% less cost than a utility company. And most of those costs, most of those savings you see because you've cut out the middleman of the utility company. You've cut out the middleman of the producer because now you are the power plant. You are the one producing the electricity. So obviously it's going to be not as expensive. Now, depending on what program you go with to go solar, you will either get a fixed bill, meaning that you're going to pay the same bill every month of every year for 25 years or less, depending on how quickly you want to pay it back. Or there's a price protection, typically of about 3%. Now, each option has its pros and cons, and we're going to go into detail about those pros and cons, but just keep in mind that whichever one you go with, whether it's a fixed bill or 3% price protection, way better than what utility companies are offering. And then, to be quite frank, the biggest reason to go solar is the equity. Okay, right now, the way you should be looking at it is you're renting your electricity. Okay, for the same reason you have decided to purchase a home rather than rent a home is typically because, number one, if you rent a home, you're subject to price increases, just like you are with a utility company. They can increase your price whenever they want, and you don't really have too much say in it. Okay? That's why a lot of people buy a house. They don't want a landlord. Your utility company is essentially working as your landlord right now. Okay? Number two is equity. When you decide that you do not want to live in that home any longer and you want to move somewhere else, all the money that you have been spending every month into your mortgage is in the house. When you sell that house, you will be getting that money back. Maybe all of it, maybe half of it. Most people right now in the market are making money off of their houses. So it's the equity. When you go solar, you are not paying for electricity. You are paying for the panels, which means that when the time comes that you decide you want to sell your house, you can sell the panels and you're going to get money for those panels. If you're lucky, maybe you'll get more than what you put in. Even if you get half of it, that's way more than what you're getting with your utility company. So in terms of equity, I would personally jot that down as the biggest reason to go solar, to be honest. But yeah, this is the brief overview of utility companies, the problem that is a utility company, the monopoly side of things, the fact that, a lot of these companies at the end of the day are not government agencies. They're privately or publicly traded companies. So their priority is not to get you electricity and make sure that you're happy with the electricity that you get. That is not their priority. Their priority is to make sure that they're making enough profit that their shareholders will continue to give them a positive evaluation. That is what a utility company does. And that gets lost because a lot of people feel like a utility company is like a government agency, and they're not. They're there to make money. That's their job, to make money. So keep that in mind. They are regulated, but in certain states, like in Texas, they're not regulated at all. That's why in Texas, back I think it was about a year and a half, 2 years ago, there was a freeze in Texas, and people died because they lost electricity because it was so cold and the infrastructure was not up to date because the company did not want to invest in the infrastructure. There was no money to be made off of that. So they didn't do it, and they're not regulated and enforced to do it. So, if there was some sort of, national, federal, utility company, at that point, maybe that would be a good solution. But as it stands right now, you're really rolling the dice on your utility company, and you better pray and hope that they're not taking advantage of you, because if they are, there's not much that you can really do about it unless you go solar. And even that might have its own problems, but we'll get into that in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, there is a link at the description box of this video for you to fill out a form in case you want more personalized recommendations for going solar, or if you need any advice, feel free to contact me. Feel free to like and subscribe, share the video if you know anyone that is interested in going solar. But stay happy and healthy, and you guys take care. Bye bye.